well, welcome to SPAT Seminar 5. Tonight we're going to talk about the SPAT assessment analysis, student learning outcomes, and the concluding reflection. I will make the video available to you when we finish so that you can go back and kind of track through the different pieces and parts and how you do them. So as you can see, we're going to kind of talk through a lot of information tonight. And the first one really has to do with our purposes for this section of the SPAT. So the first part in the unit planning, you were really demonstrating as a summative assessment your ability to plan with student learning in mind. Who are your students that you teach? And then how to connect them with the content that you teach. So you're really demonstrating that ability to plan and not only know the content, but also plan for particular students in mind, how to create effective sequences. All of that goes into your unit plan. This should be a check mark for most of you at this point. So your SPATs should be up on task screen now. Let's get them going. Again, if I gave you the thumbs up or your mentor teacher, I mean your liaison has given you the thumbs up, let's get those posted and scored. And I don't want you to worry and be saying in your head, what if I change things? What if I have to change? We expect you to change. As I said before, that's why when you go into the teaching section, when you start to teach, you should be keeping a journal, taking notes. What is it that you did during the teaching or are going to do during the teaching? Keep track of that, because you're going to see as we go through this next section, this next part, you're going to have lots of opportunities to reflect on what you changed and why. So the planning was just that. It was your best guess at what you were going to do in your teaching, but it never goes that way. Right? You're always adapting and you're always being flexible based on your student needs. So that's where this next part comes in, because you plan, you teach and take notes, and then this ending part of the SPAT really is about going back and reflecting on your outcomes. What happened? Why did it happen? So that's really the purpose. And to me, honestly, this is the heart of teaching. It is how you get better. And the way you're going to get better is by being able to be critical, being able to be reflective of your practice, and being able to set goals for doing things differently next time, and for you to be able to recognize what went well and be able to say, yes, that connected with students, and here's why I know it connected with the students. Here's the data that tells me that my teaching right here was effective, so that you can repeat that again. Okay, so what we're really thinking about in these pieces and parts of the SPATs is, what did my students learn? How do I know they learned it? And then what did I learn? That concluding reflection piece is about what you learned. So those are kind of the overall big guiding questions of these sections. Okay, and so really, before you start your analysis, one thing you might want to brainstorm with yourself is you might want to just get on this slide, and before you even start to do the analysis, really think, what did I want my students to learn in this unit? And obviously, learning targets are something, right? You really hope they got the learning targets. You really hope they met the standards. And are there other dispositional things you hope they learned? Maybe there's some social skills that you hope they learned when you were doing group activities. So kind of take a broad look for yourself. And then, what is it you actually can ascertain from the student data that you have collected? And I can't tell you how many times what I wanted them to learn didn't actually get measured. So, or in the way that I measured, I can see X, Y, and Z, but I really actually never could see and Z, right? So it's really interesting to kind of think about what could you see from what you collected, and then what data sources really did provide that evidence of learning. So this is just in your own head. Maybe it's your journaling about it, but it'll prepare your brain to get into these activities. Okay. You're going to be working on 3 sections of the SPAT that are on TaskStream to finish. So first, and I know that when you look at the directions in the field guide, SLO and core practices is often listed as like number 3. But in my mind, I think for some people, it really helps them to do this section first. You don't upload anything for this section, and I'll show you a little bit more detail about it. What you are going to do is fill out a form, and it's going to lead you through the mathematical calculations of your student learning outcomes. So how many students met the target? How much growth did you see? So this section actually is like a step-by-step, and it's filling out this document, and it's you really collecting evidence is what I like to think of it as. And sometimes when you do this part first, it really helps you wrap your brain around the rest of it because it gives you something to write about. So that's why sometimes I'll suggest trying this out first. If it doesn't work for your brain and you do it third, it's not going to matter. Okay, it's just sometimes it does help some people to do this part first. The second part is the assessment analysis. It is one big document that has 2 separate sections. Okay, section 1 is going to be the assessment of student learning, whole class. So you're going to be looking at your whole class student learning. And then section 2 is going to be your analysis of your 3 case study students. And I just wanted to remind everybody that you cannot use real students' names. You have to remove them, call them student A or B, or give them a pseudonym. Okay. And here on the slides, I've given you the sections that you're going to see in the section. So what are the subsections of section 1? What are the subsections in section 2? And then last, you're going to write a concluding reflection. So let's take a look at each of these sections to try to give you a framework for how to complete these sections. So student learning outcomes, you will see this on TaskStream. It's listed as SLO and core practices. So it's set, sometimes I don't know why some students just miss this piece. And basically when you go inside, it's just going to, ooh, I have a mistake, I'll fix that. It's just going to it's going to ask you a series of questions. And basically you are going to just write the answers. So like how many students met or exceeded proficiency after instruction? You're going to put it in. So when you set that proficiency score, we talked about how important that was. How many students actually met that goal? Okay, so it's like you're going to look at it. You're going to look at it before instruction. It's going to ask you to look at it before instruction. It's going to ask you to look at it after instruction. It's going to ask you, it's going to lead you through a calculation of percentage growth. And when you get done, you're going to have a really nice overview of your numbers. So your quantitative data will be listed here for you when you go through the questions on the form. And it's also going to ask you to go back. I'm sorry for the typo. I'll fix that in a minute. But it's going to ask you to go back and document what program core practices did you demonstrate in your unit. In other words, what engagement strategies did you use? What high yield strategies did you use? What technology did you use? It's just going to ask you to list them out to document that, yes, indeed, you have used a variety of high-powered instructional strategies across your unit. Okay, and now what I think you have is a nice overview of what you're going to want to highlight and talk about in your narrative. The next section is called assessment analysis. Again, this assessment analysis has two parts, your whole class as well as your 3 students. So let's take a look at what that's going to look like. The first thing you're going to do is you are going to create a graph that looks like this. So if you look down at the bottom of the graph, you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, those are students. So I've labeled students as student 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then you can see that their pre-test data is in purple, their post-test data is in green, and that big line going across was the base, is the proficiency score. That's the score that you chose. Like, this is where I'm going to be happy if students make this score or above. That was the minimum score to meet proficient in this unit. So what I'd like to do for a second is I'd like to ask you to unmute and tell me what you notice. What are you noticing in this graph? If you were gonna ask questions about it, wonder about it, write narratives about it, what would be some like general takeaways, and then what would be some specific takeaways about how successful this unit was?
I noticed that student 1, 2, and 20 didn't have a pre-test apparently, but I also noticed that almost a good majority of them were able to do or exceed the average proficiency score for the post tests.
Okay, so overall, and I think that when you start the narrative regarding this graph, you always want to start with overall, here's what I noticed. For my whole class, most people, and here you're going to have this great number because you've already calculated your SLOs, right? So this percentage of kids met proficiency. Okay, that's a success story. You want to celebrate it. You're feeling really good about that. Okay, but Mara says you also have a little bit of explaining to do because you have 3 kids that didn't take the pre-test. Why? So you'll note that, you will know, you'll say something like, you will notice that 3 students did not take the pre-test. That is because they were out with COVID, whatever it was the reason. They just moved here in the middle of the unit. They were out sick. Someone came and pulled 3 kids for special time right when I was giving the pre-test. And unfortunately, I never went back and gave it to them at a different time. Like, you just have to tell the story of what happened. Okay, what else do you notice? What else do you wonder about?
Student 3 and student 16 scored exactly the same on their pre and post test.
Okay, that should be explained. Okay, you have some students who actually demonstrated no growth. What happened? And sometimes, again, it's as simple as they went on vacation or whatever it is. Or look at number 16. Look at student 16. Guess what? They already knew and exceeded proficiency before you started. Same as number 8. Same as number 6 and 5 and 4 and 22. Yes, they did more. Most of them did more growing after, right? They learned some new information. Student 16 probably could have cared less because they already knew about it, right? So that would be something you need to explain. What differentiation did you plan ahead of time for those students that were already at proficiency before you started the unit? And if you didn't plan anything, then this is a lesson for you. It's something to reflect about, right? Man, I never even thought that there were all these kids just sitting there that already knew it. And I didn't differentiate for them. And the numbers now show, although some students did make some significant gains, what else could they have been doing? Could I have pushed them further in this topic, right? So that's definitely something to talk about. What else? What else might you wonder? What else might you want to talk about?
I'm not sure if this is just me picking up on something that's not very significant, but I find it intriguing that student 4, 5, 6, and 13 all did the exact same on their pre-test and post-test. So that's something I'm noticing. I don't know if that's like fairly common when students are taking a pre and post-test, that they're all scoring the same, but.
So Riley, that's a really interesting noticing. And this is something, when we get down to the assessment quality analysis, that is something I would come back to. Okay, because it would be super interesting to see if those students all got the same questions right on the pretest, which might mean that you might have had something that was taught like in the grade prior that students really already knew, like maybe there was some overlapping instruction, and then Riley's thinking, maybe they were all sitting right next to each other, right? So this is how you're gonna come up with a story to tell. You're gonna create this graph, and then you're gonna start telling the story. First, the overall story, like your celebrations. Then you're going to start pointing out some of these interesting things that you're wondering about and start reflecting on why some of these things might have happened. Man, I would certainly tell the story of student 15 and student 11. That is amazing. When you look at that percentage gain that they did, they went from knowing so little to so much. Woohoo. Okay, so those are just some things that I would encourage you to do. And then look at those students who maybe didn't make the mark. How much, excuse me. And maybe you start to think about some reasons why student 7 and student 12, like you start to look at those students that did not make proficiency and did not make much gain, what happened there maybe. So you could divide this section up however you wanted. They're all going to look different because you all have a different story to tell. But the similarity is going to be, you are all going to start your reflection by making a graph like this. Okay, pre-test, post-test per student, with your proficiency baseline going across. Okay. But then again, like we just did, now you have to start to take some notes for yourself about what stories you want to tell. You're going to give this overall picture, like I said, but maybe you want to share some really cool stories about student development. Okay. Or stories about your teaching that you think may have impacted things. Because really, narratives tell the story. We all look at that quantitative data and that graph, and we have all of these wonderings about the graph. Without the narrative, without that qualitative data, some of those secrets stay locked inside the graph. So it's up to you to explain to the reader what was going on and what you noticed and what you want us to notice. So you can also include in this part more qualitative data if you would like. So this is an area where you could include some work samples if you like, okay, that might demonstrate a particular assignment that you think, like really showed something about the teaching here, maybe pictures of kids doing some of these hands-on activities, You could also include observations you made in a journal when you were teaching. All of those types of pieces of data can be used in this section if you would like to elaborate and enrich your story. Okay. Do you have questions about the whole class, this whole class general section? Okay, this section has one more part. So we're going to go a little deeper now. And here, the SPAT asks you to demonstrate that you can assess, you can do an analysis of your assessment quality, the design of your assessment. For many of you, these are the first assessments you've designed. Okay, maybe you used an assessment somebody else designed, and you really need to think about what it is that the assessment actually told you versus what you thought you were going to learn. Maybe how well the pre and post tests were actually aligned. Did it point out all the student learning you wanted to see? So it's like you're going to ask yourself some really big questions, and you're going to look a lot more closely at the assessment. And you're going to actually create a heading for this. So, you know, you might have like whole class analysis, and then you're going to have assessment analysis. This is like the assessment of the assessment. Okay, this person did what we call a concept analysis. And I think Riley was really touching on that in the graph when she said, ooh, these students have the exact same scores. If they weren't cheating, maybe those exact same scores have to do with the fact that they all really understood certain concepts, but maybe didn't understand the same concepts, which really leads us usually back to our teaching, right? Like, oh, where did I drop the ball if everybody's getting that, is not really understanding that concept? So, oh, I'm sorry. This person basically took the topics or the learning targets. Okay, they wanted students to know 8 civilization features. Another learning target was about the Maya, Inca, and Aztecs. Another one was about the technologies they used. So these were some major sections of their unit. And then they looked at the pre, the formative, and the post to try to determine, were there certain concepts that the students really picked up on more than others? Now, this person looked at, they ended up teaching this unit to 8 students. They looked at each individual student. You could simply, if you wanted to, you could create an average and see if anything stands out to you there. It's just a way to see if the students really understood particular concepts better than others. And the thing that really is helpful in this kind of analysis, it will allow you to see holes in your teaching. So if most of the students score really low on the Maya, Inca, and Aztec questions, guess what? Either the assessment didn't measure it appropriately, or they didn't get it from the teaching. Okay, sometimes one thing that's interesting is look at this one. Look at this look at this student here. They didn't get the Maya, Inca, and Aztecs in the pre-assessment. 100% they got the formative. Okay, but in the post-test, they only got half the questions right. So in my mind, there's probably a mismatch between the formative assessment and the post-assessment. Maybe. Okay, if I saw that pattern over and over again, which I do, look up here, you see the pattern repeating, you see the pattern repeating, high score on the formative, low score on the post. I'm wondering if they practiced the information on the Maya, Inca, and Aztec in the same way that they performed it in the post-test. I'm wondering how aligned that was. That's the kind of analysis we want you to do here. Okay, so this is a concept analysis because they're looking at the different concepts, but you could also do just a question analysis. Did most of the class miss question 7? If most of the class missed question 7, you know what I start to wonder? How accessible was the language used in that assessment question? How clear were the directions? Did the target type match the assessment type? Like I said, did the students practice it in the same way you assessed it? Or did you not teach it very well? Was your teaching not aligned with the way you asked the question? And then that's how we revise our assessments. Every time I give an assessment the first time, that always happens. I always end up with a question that everybody bombs. And I always go, man, I thought I was so clear. But apparently I wasn't, because everybody got the question wrong. Sometimes it's that the question actually didn't make any sense. And other times it's that I didn't really convey the information that I wanted to. So you could do either or. You could do a concept analysis, or you can do a question analysis. I think either one is really a profitable experience for you. Some people do both, but you don't have to do both. But I would say do one or another. Okay, either look at all the questions related to a particular concept, or just look at each question. Sometimes they tell you the same thing. Okay, so we're going to move into the next section, which is about the 3 students. Before we do that, I want to just stop briefly and ask, does anybody have any questions about section 1? Your whole class graph, your narrative that goes with it, and then that digging into the quality of your assessment. Okay, that's great. And if you want to come back and look at this video again to help you look at the slides and how things have been done, feel free to do that. Again, if I show you a model, I have to tell you that every SPAT is so different because people go at that assessment analysis in different ways. People's graphs look different. So all I can basically do is talk about the construction and the format of how you should be writing this, and then what is it you're trying to show. Okay, this is section 2 of your assessment analysis. It's the analysis of the student work, your 3 case studies. So you're going to start out with an introduction, you know, kind of like why them? How did you plan to differentiate in your unit? Things like that. I just gave you a few prompts that might help you. And then again, after your introduction, you're going to want to start with a graph, and you're going to write this as 3 separate case studies. So the headings in this section will be introduction, student A, student B, and student C. Okay. Student A is going to have a graph. And what you're going to do is you're going to take a class average. So what was your class average on your pre-test? This person has 1, 2, 3 formatives. They have their post-test, and they had their attitude survey that they did at the end. So they're looking at these data points. And then what they're going to do is they're going to lay their case study student right over the top. So you have your case study student, which in this case, student 11 is blue. And there's the class average, which is very interesting because you can see that although this student is a little lower than the class average, the student is not so far behind. They're kind of keeping pace with what the average looks like. It's just a little bit lower. So that's not too bad. Another way people do this is to do like a pre and post also, like what did this student do pre and post with the bar graph, but then you don't see any of the formative assessment. Okay. However, in this look, what you miss is that direct comparison between the pre and the post. And you can see that this student on the pre actually, let's see, didn't grow so much on the post. They went from like 9 to 12. And we don't have a real indication of the baseline, which I mean the proficiency score, which actually would be good to see on here for at least the post. But it doesn't look like there was a heck of a lot of growth. But look at the rest of the class. The average student went from 12 to 16. So they didn't have very much growth either. Okay, so here's another one. Okay, this person also included the 3 students with their pseudonyms, and then they showed that direct comparison of pre and post. I think both is really nice, just to see if there's any assignments that they really bombed on. And then here's like, maybe this is in your introduction. Like this could be a nice one at the start of your introduction before you go to the individual students. Okay, in this section, you also want to provide an analysis of student work. So this is a sample of this student's pre and post. And again, you're looking at the work. The narrative that comes next has to explain the growth that happened, the differentiation strategies that helped this student grow. What were some things that you helped this student get from here to here? Sometimes in work samples, people will show like a sample of written work and then the feedback the teacher gives. That's another way to do it. Sometimes you'll show an example of what the whole class did and then what the differentiation looked like. So like if you gave them some kind of tiered assignment, or if you gave them a sheet to do that had fewer questions, something like that. Or I've seen people show the assignment and then off to the side, they create like a big voice bubble, and inside they talk about the differentiation the student was provided for this assignment. So it's up to you how you want to do that, but each student does need an analysis of a work sample. And your narrative really needs to outline the individualized differentiation that you provided. And then you want to analyze, was that enough? Did I provide enough differentiation? Sometimes people say, oh my gosh, I provided too much scaffolding. I didn't let them do any of the work. And they were probably capable of doing more. So this is where you're going to really give a talk about that for each student. And I think if I was going to give you an outline for what you're writing about, I think it might look like this. If I was writing this paper, I would have an overall introduction about this was my unit, this is what I taught, you know, like a little overview of your assessments. And then the whole class pre and post graph I just showed you, a narrative that tells the story, your assessment quality analysis. Okay, maybe a little concluding paragraph there. I didn't put that in. Then 3 students introduction. And then for each of your 3 students, you'll have all of this information and then a conclusion overall. I'll add the, oh, I can't do that, sorry, whoops. Okay, all right, questions. Does anybody have questions about this? Okay. Okay. The last piece, the third piece, is your concluding reflection. I would recommend that you take a good look at the reflection rubric. It's on TaskStream for you to look at. It's the same reflection rubric we've been using in the program. So you've seen it before. Okay, and it's going to give you 3 prompts. So your concluding reflection is going to have 3 sections. It's going to have focus on students, okay? focus, and then you're going to have a section on inquiry into your practice. And then how is that going to inform and change what you do? And I'll give you a hint. This should not be 1 page long. You need to really dig deep. And sometimes you'll repeat some things that you talked about in your assessment analysis, and that's okay. Okay. And here's some prompts that may help you to think about what to write about. Okay. Focus on students. And I think in this section, the most important thing really is whose interests were served and were not served in your instruction. Going back to that whole graph, wow, this teaching was effective for some students, but not for others. If I was to categorize those students, could I find groups of kids that I didn't serve? All of a sudden, if this unit was not effective for kids that have, let's say, a below grade level reading level, but this is a social studies unit, wow, the reading was way too dense in my whole unit, and I didn't differentiate for kids that didn't have a high enough reading level to really access this content. That's when I say dig deep, that's what I'm saying. Okay. And then inquiry. What could I have done? What could be different? Maybe I'm going to ask my mentor teacher what they might have noticed. Maybe I'm going to go back to my videos and watch them during my SPAT. What did I notice in my teaching? So you're really digging deep and trying to find some new ideas, or maybe, gosh, things were not that engaging. I used too many worksheets. Like you're really thinking about this is your wonderings. And then inform. This is all about change. Okay. Identifying your strengths. What am I going to do again? And identifying those things that didn't hit a home run. And how are you going to do it differently? Okay, so dig deep. This is not like in this part, we do not want you to just do some surface writing. This is an important part of this. Some might say this might be the most important part. So really dig in here to this and think about what your focus is on. Is it on the students or is it on myself? Are you making excuses for what went wrong, or are you finding solutions? Those are some of the things that the rubric looks at. Are you open-minded to change, or are you stuck in something that didn't work? Okay, so thank you for listening during this section. I'm going to go ahead and I am going to stop the recording, and then we'll go ahead and have a chance to talk.